Okay. Well, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to Pediatric Grand Rounds, and specifically today to the Sam Day Foundation Endowed Lectureship. It's our fourth lecture that we've had. We're here today because of Sam and his parents. So Sam was a patient here who passed away from Ewing sarcoma at the age of 15. And his parents started the Sam Day Foundation to bring something positive out of that loss. And so the Sam Day Foundation exists to raise money and awareness and support for childhood cancer research, specifically focused on sarcomas and brain tumors. And their work has been instrumental in supporting us and many other researchers, so we're really grateful to them. Lauren and Bob are here today. Many members of the foundation, the board are here as well, so we thank you for supporting this lectureship and allowing us to bring speakers in to educate us and help us become more aware of these issues. So I'm going to turn it over right now to Lorna, the founder and director, to say a few words. Thank you, Lorna.
Hello again, everyone. Thank you for being here. Yes, I'm Lorna Day, executive director and founder of the Sam Day Foundation, and am also Sam's mom. Sam was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma back in 2010. He was 9 years old. He was a patient here at Dornbecker for 6 years. He lived with Ewing sarcoma for that long, and then he actually passed away here at Dornbecker as well. And that was in 2016. We launched the organization in 2018 because during that time, I learned how underfunded and neglected childhood cancer research was, specifically when it came to sarcomas and brain tumors. So we started the foundation in 2018. To date, we have now contributed $2.7 million towards childhood cancer research. Our most recent investment is with Dr. Alex Davies, who's down at the hill at the Knight Cancer Institute. So he's really focused on these very stubborn osteosarcoma lung mets. So I'm sure he's going to figure that out in no time, and we'll overcome that obstacle. So we're really happy to be a partner in funding research with OHSU. I know there's a big buzz about things going on right here, and we're looking forward to some momentum and even more in partnership. So my hope is that the Sam Day Foundation can create the tools that you as providers need to do better for kids with cancer, so that when you walk into a clinic room after a child has had a scan, you can do so with a smile on your face, and you can say, we have great news. Because I know that some of you providers have had to offer terrible news over and over and over again, and we don't think that's okay. So today we get to step aside from the research side of things, or a close look at the research and even the clinical piece, and hear from Nancy Goodman. And she's doing incredible work pressing Congress to make changes on behalf of children with cancer. And if you've been here before, you know that I always have to sneak a little tidbit of Sam in. So I was thinking about Nancy and her work, and I remembered when Sam was in the second grade, so he's probably about 7 years old. And I remember so clearly, he got so mad one day. He got so mad because he learned that the voting age was 18 years old. And it was going to be like another 11 years before our government would consider his opinion valid and one that would count. And it just reminds me that we have to be a voice for kids. We have to be an advocate for kids, and we have to be aware of their needs and to speak on their behalf. And so that's why it's very exciting to have Nancy come and talk to us, because I don't know of anyone who's advocating for children in the childhood cancer space as good as she is. So I'm really honored to have you here, and we'll look forward to hearing from you.
I can give you a little more background, but I think Lauren already said the most important pieces. So Nancy, after her son lost his battle against medulloblastoma, founded the organization Kids v. Cancer. Nancy's background is she is a lawyer who trained at the University of Chicago and then has a master's in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and so was in advocacy and public policy, et cetera, and has taken that and leveraged that to advocate on behalf, not just actually only children with cancer, but for many, for pediatric rare diseases, focusing actually on legislation and changing policy at the national, at the federal government level to improve access to treatments and new therapies for children with cancer and rare diseases. And so I've had the personal privilege of getting to meet Nancy when I was still in New York, and then again today, and she is a force, and the work that she has done is amazing, and I'm going to let her tell you all about it. So please join me in welcoming Nancy.
Thank you all. I really appreciate the introductions. I hope I don't disappoint. So my story begins 18 years ago. I was living in New York City on the Upper West Side, 82nd and Broadway. And with my husband, my two kids, Jacob and Ben, they were 4 and 8 years old. My son Jacob was a 3rd grader at an all-boys school collegiate, and we were trying to get Ben in, which was like not easy because he was a sassy little boy. And one day, and collegiate's a kind of place by a very thick culture. Basketball is the religion, and in fact, Nick Moore here was on the basketball team, which was Jacob's religion. And one day he woke up and he had a headache and nausea. And all of you, of course, know what that means and how that starts the story of brain cancer. I wasn't really sure who was going to be in the audience. I know some people, for whom it's just really inspiring to hear the personal pieces, and for others it's really heavy. And honestly, for me, it's hard after 18 years to keep on telling it. So what I did is I have here a few of my entries from Caring Bridge, which I used to email our friends and family, and I hope for those of you who are listening, it is not the heavy piece that sometimes I feel like it is when I listen. So March 5th, 2007. Last Monday, Jacob was diagnosed with metastatic medulloblastoma. He had surgery on Tuesday. In the short run, while the operation went as expected, Jacob developed posterior fossa syndrome. This has caused him to lose much of his speech, to lose much of his ability to move volitionally, and to regress emotionally. If there are silver linings in episodes like this, they include the outpouring of love and support from many families and friends. The recovery rates are promising, so we thought they were promising. And by 3 years after treatment, a child who is disease-free is pretty well out of the woods. That would occur around Jacob's 13th birthday, so let's all plan for the most beautiful bar mitzvah ever. We'll stay in touch. Thank you for everything. Well, it was actually a lot harder than we thought it would be. And I'm going to read you another Caring Bridge entry from 7 months later, in December of 2007. Dear friends, Jacob has embraced life with abandon. He's going to PE, play dates, watching school wrestling matches, and it goes without saying, rooting for the Dutchman basketball team. He has regained a full range of facial expressions, and it's great to see his smile again. Jacob still uses a wheelchair, but can walk about the apartment. And last week, he walked the 4 blocks to school using Stryker, his new 4-footed cane. Jacob's speech is more fluent. He likes to tease doctors and demand that they ask their questions with precision to get the answer they are looking for. A dangerous tactic for a kid for whom recall is not so hot. And he's gone online to order t-shirts that read, "Bald is the new black," and "White cells are for losers." And then it came to an end. And this is January of 2009. Dear friends and family, as you know, our son Jacob has been struggling with brain cancer for the past 2 years. Last night, he lost that struggle. We are grateful for all the love and support our family and friends have provided Jacob and the rest of us. With these 2 past years have been many, many joyous moments. Throughout his treatments, Jacob maintained a remarkably positive attitude. His wry smile and dry wit brought happiness all around. He's an inspiration to us all on so many levels. As difficult as the last 2 years have been for Jacob, the end was peaceful. Lying between us in our bed as we recounted stories and saying to him, Jacob just went to sleep, pain-free. That was a tough night. You know, Jacob went to sleep. Ben was in his bedroom at that point, and we had to go wake him up. He was 6 years old, and tell him Jacob died. He had no idea Jacob was terminally ill at the time, so it was quite a night. As medical professionals, you know, many of you see this every day, and I don't know how you do it. Crazy. But, you know, what came out of this for me? One aspect of Jacob's treatment that was particularly painful and shocking was that the drugs offered to treat Jacob were all over 40 years old. They were old chemotherapy drugs. And there was no theory that they would reach cure. It was just unbelievable to me that, you know, though I've been reading the New York Times about all the incredible advances in cancer research and targeted therapies and immunotherapies, that they didn't apply to pediatrics. And so Jacob died on a Friday. And on Saturday, I opened up my laptop in my dining room table, and I founded Kids v. Cancer. And I committed to changing the landscape of pediatric cancer research. And particularly, because the way I like to approach my life is to be as focused as possible to make the biggest impact on the narrowest piece possible. I focused on the question of how can we ensure that pediatric drug development and therapies for pediatric cancer advance at least as fast as cancer drugs and cancer therapies for adults with cancer. And so that's what I've been working on for the past 16 years. I'm a lawyer, so I chose to address this problem as a lawyer looking at legislative and policy reform. I wasn't actually doing policy before Jacob died. I was an international trade lawyer in a corporate law firm, so it was a little bit of retooling. Most of you are doctors. I realize you hate lawyers. And, and I'm here today to change your opinion of us. You know, the fact is there would be no science and no drug development without lawyers because there's no drug development in a pure free market economy. Drug development is a public good, and by that I mean it's a good that is both non-excludable and non-rivalrous. So non-excludable, that individuals cannot be prevented from consuming the good even if they do not pay for it. And non-rivalrous in an economic framework refers to the fact that a person's consumption of a drug does not diminish the amount available to others. And so of course this is drug development, right? And so for this reason, any drug development that occurs because of legal incentives and mandates that have been established. In fact, this issue is in our Constitution. It is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, and it reads, the Constitution, see, I bet you didn't think you'd be having constitutional law class today. The Constitution shall have the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. And so is this enough? Well, not really. It's a bit like if you give the mouse a cookie. The constitutional protection for discoveries was a step forward, but patents, it turned out, were insufficient incentives when it came to all drug development, and particular drugs for rare diseases. So skip forward 200 years, and in 1983, Congress passed a bill called the Orphan Drug Act. And what that does is it provides a new kind of protection called market exclusivity to drugs developed for rare diseases. Market exclusivity ensures the sponsor or manufacturer of a drug that drug market will be free from competition and protected for a certain number of years. For rare diseases, it's 7 years. And as a fun side note, for those of you who are a little bit older, the impetus of this law was a TV show, a doctor's TV show, Quincy M.E. So that's where doctors are effective politically. Okay, so the Orphan Drug Act was quite successful for providing some incentives for rare disease drug development, but incentives were still insufficient for other classes of drugs, for example, in particular for drugs in new classes of drugs, in new classes of chemical entities. And so Congress passed soon after that the Hatch-Waxman Act, one portion of which provided market exclusivity in 3- and 5-year tranches for drugs that had new molecular entities or new chemical entities. And then still, incentives were insufficient, and so Congress went back again. In 2012, Congress passed the GAIN Act, which provides 12 years of data exclusivity for biologics, right? And so the view in 2012 is that biologics were extraordinarily difficult to develop. The science wasn't that developed at that time, and they were also extraordinarily expensive to develop. And then again, more recently, Congress passed, the GAIN Act is for antibiotics, and the GAIN Act was for antibiotics. The problem with antibiotics, of course, is like if a manufacturer develops an antibiotic, the physicians don't use the antibiotic until current antibiotics meet with resistance, right? And so there may be 5 or more years before a new antibiotic that hits the market really gets a market share. By then, their patent life may have been spent. And so they got some exclusivity as well. And so this is how all drug development occurs, because Congress has passed some bill requiring or incentivizing drug development. And this is also why we haven't had drug development for pediatrics, because the incentives and requirements developed so far haven't worked as well as we have wanted them to. And so this is what I started focusing on. So the first question I focused on, Jacob died in 2009. And the first question I focused on is, we didn't know then, that, as I'm told now, that about half of all actionable mutations for pediatric cancers are not found in adult cancers. But we did know that there would be drugs developed for pediatric cancers for which there was no adult market. And so how do we create an incentive for those drugs to be developed? The Orphan Drug Act did provide 7 years exclusivity, but that's not really adequate when 400 kids a year have medulloblastoma, or 80 kids a year have type 3 medulloblastoma, which was probably what Jacob had. So we created a new kind of incentive. There was a law already on the books that was viewed as a failure. It had been rushed through. It had no impact to date. It was to provide incentives for tropical disease drugs. And the way it worked is that if a company developed a tropical disease drug, FDA, and received approval, FDA would grant the company a voucher. And the voucher would come with rights to faster FDA review on any drug for any disease. So, heart disease, diabetes, anything. And then the voucher would be somewhat transferable. It didn't work. But I decided, I was just a bereaved mom. I wasn't an FDA expert at that time. I was just beginning, and I decided it was worth a few years of my time to figure out why it didn't work, whether it could be made to work, and whether we could extend it to pediatrics to create an incentive for pediatrics. So I spent a year and a half talking to economists and members of Congress, venture capitalists, and business executives. And we made 7 changes. We required that eligible drugs be new molecular entities for pediatrics. And we required that the indications on the FDA labels be pediatric and rare. We required the drugs by themselves to merit priority review. That way they would be for pediatric cancer or other life-threatening illnesses. So drug development for pretty much all pediatric life-threatening illnesses receives what's called priority review, and that's a faster form of FDA review. We expanded eligibility of drugs able to earn a voucher to drugs that were already approved in Europe or other parts of the world, so that kids in the United States might still have access to these drugs through an FDA approval process, even though they were approved in Europe. Interestingly, that hasn't actually ever happened, even after the bill was passed. We added a designation process to identify these drugs early on in the development process so that startup companies could use this when they made arguments about what the capitalization of their companies should be. We made the vouchers infinitely transferable, and we shortened the duration of notice that a company was required to give the FDA before exercising a voucher. I've never drafted a bill before, and I didn't have FDA policy, so I was really just winging it with a bunch of really wonderful expert people to support us. We called the new bill the Creating Hope Act. We started lobbying for it. I had never been on Capitol Hill at that time. And to our amazement, Congress enacted the bill in 2012. So now, pursuant to Creating Hope Act, when companies develop a drug for a pediatric cancer or another life-threatening rare pediatric disease, the companies will receive a voucher, and the companies may sell the voucher. And the voucher holder then can go use it, the voucher, exercise the voucher to get faster FDA review on their drug. So for example, there's a drug, a monoclonal antibody that was developed by a company called United Therapeutics for neuroblastoma, Unituxin. They earned a voucher, and they sold their voucher for $350 million, that was our best one, to Sanofi. Sanofi had a PCSK9 drug for heart disease, and they at that time were, it was about 2015, they were racing to market against Amgen. So the first to market, when there's a new class of drugs, has a permanent lifetime advantage because the first mover locks up the purchase agreements with the insurance providers. So Amgen beat Sanofi in Europe, but Sanofi exercised the voucher, and they beat Amgen in the United States, locked up the purchase agreements, and that's really how the program is supposed to work. Of course, I think those drugs don't work very well now, right? So they were a disappointment. But that's beside the point. So what's happened? Since 2012, more than 60 drugs have come to market for kids with cancer and other life-threatening illnesses. Vouchers trade for about $150 million a voucher now. And there have been more than $9 billion worth of incentives in the form of vouchers sold and traded since 2012. So creating, a real and material reason for companies to consider developing drugs for kids with terrible but very, very rare diseases. So it's something we're really pretty excited about. It has to be reauthorized every 4 years. That was one of the compromises we made when we got it passed through Congress. There was some concern, Democratic legislators were concerned that this might not be a program that really provided the incentives that we asserted it would. And so we've been reauthorizing it. In 2016, we reauthorized it. In 2020. Unfortunately, in 2024, Congress let it expire. We had just an awful, awful experience. Our bill went in front of Congress. It was supposed to be attached to the end-of-year budget, and I'm sure you don't remember, as everyone in DC does, that Elon Musk started tweeting. This was like just pre-Doge, that he thought that the budget should not have 900 pages worth of healthcare riders in a bipartisan agreement of the healthcare riders. And so Elon Musk said that he would fund the political opponent for any Republican who voted for the bill. And it fell apart in 3 hours, and all 900 pages of amazing bills for patients and researchers evaporated overnight, including our bill. So we are still working on that. So this has created an incentive for pediatric cancer rare disease drug development. It's not perfect, and we're still, the incentive occurs like when the drug is approved, not at the beginning of company formation, when there's an acute scarcity of financing, but it has been pretty exciting. We then turn to our next problem, which was, most cancer drug development, of course, occurs for adult cancers, for major adult cancers. And yet many of those cancers would benefit children as well. The challenge, of course, is that pediatric oncologists don't have access to those drugs to study them and to identify, if or how they should be used in kids. So we went back to the drawing board. There was a law already on the books called the Pediatric Research Equity Act, which had been passed in 2003. And this law actually did do just that. It authorized the FDA to require pediatric studies of drugs approved for adults. Fun fact, Hillary Clinton was the sponsor of that bill, and she got that through. The problem with PREA was that it didn't apply to cancer. And the reason it didn't apply to cancer was that in 2003, like the notion, the legal idea of what a disease was for cancer referred to the organ of tumor origin. So neuroblastoma is not the same thing as adult small cell lung cancer, even if they both have an ALK mutation for which an ALK inhibitor would be potentially therapeutic. So, and there was another problem as well. Drugs with Orphan Drug Act status were exempt from requirements that they be studied in children. So we went back to Congress, we drafted again. It takes about 6 to 12 months to draft a bill, and another 6 to 12 months to negotiate with the major stakeholders to get language on a bill that everybody who matters is either at least neutral on. And in DC, what everybody means is the FDA and then the two major trade associations for the pharmaceutical industry. One is called Pharma and one is called Bio. Cute. And so you got to get for FDA and biopharma, neither can be negative, and you need at least one positive, and the other one can be neutral. So we got FDA positive, of course, and bio and pharma. Bio, we got them to cranky. We got them to cranky. And that was really hard to pass. And we went back and unbelievably, really beginner's luck, but we got this thing passed in 2017. And so now, for every new cancer drug that is developed, what happens is at the beginning of the phase 2 study for every novel drug, for the first adult clinical development plan, the FDA meets with the sponsor, and the sponsor is and they go back and forth proposing what their pediatric study will be, and the FDA must sign off on this before the sponsor does their pivotal trial. And this study includes, it's only through early phase 2, but it requires like time deadlines of when a company must start accruals, when they must complete accruals, when they must submit their data to the FDA, when a phase 2 should start. And so it's really like a very promising instrument. And we called the bill the Race for Children Act, and it got passed, and it was just like the most miserable couple of years of my life, besides Jacob being sick, of course. But so we got it passed. It went into effect 2020. And before 2020, as those of you who are pediatric oncologists know, like the studies in COG, Children's Oncology Group, or in other pediatric consortiums, like didn't use newly approved or unapproved cancer therapies very often. They just, it was really quite rare. It was very, very difficult for oncologists to access those drugs. And since then, 80% of all drugs that are that the FDA deems as having a molecular target, which is substantially relevant to a pediatric cancer, are getting these required studies. And the other 20%, by the way, the only reason they're not getting the studies is the FDA has authority to waive the requirement. For example, if like the pediatric population is really, really rare, or if that therapy is not a priority for that pediatric population, there's something more promising, or for a host of other reasons that I would just call good sense. So since 2020, there's really been a host of opportunities, and that's been very exciting. We went back more recently, and we're trying, the limitation of Race for Children Act is that FDA only has the authority to require monotherapy studies. And as all of you know, cure for cancers usually is achieved only by a cocktail of drugs. And all standard therapies are multiplicity of drugs. Cancer cells have redundancies. Like very simple stuff, but we went back and we have our new bill that we're asking Congress to pass is the Give Kids a Chance Act, and it would authorize the FDA to waive the pediatric study, or require a monotherapy study, or require a combination study of 2 or more drugs. The first drug would be an investigational drug of the sponsor, and the second or third or follow-on drugs would either be owned by the sponsor or generics. And this is a limitation, but in fact, if you look at adult combination studies, They are rarely cross-company. They are almost always within the same company. There are so many intellectual property and pricing issues that companies are sensitive of, so they really try to avoid cross-company combination studies. And we've had really a hell of a time with Give Kids a Chance Act. The goal was passage in 2022. There was an FDA bill going through Congress. We got it passed in the House of Representatives version. Then I don't know if you all remember the Schoolhouse Rock video, I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill. That's true. You should watch that again, because that's like a very good basis. But then we went to the Senate, we got it through committee, and then we were told verbally it was going to be in the Senate version. And it didn't get in for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with our bill. All of the riders to the FDA bill that addressed patients or consumers were cut from the bill, because the pharmaceutical industry was at that time very politically effective and had the opportunity to do that. So that was very frustrating. And then we went back. I'm sure you all know that Congress is 2 years, right? And then after the 2 years expires, which the last one ended December 31st, 2024, you have to start all over again with what you're doing. You have to reintroduce your bill. It goes back to zero. So in 2023, went back to zero. We reintroduced the bill. We got 235 co-sponsors in the House and 7 in the Senate. It was just exhausting. And we got it passed in the House, and we got it attached to the budget of this budget last December, along with the Give Kids a Chance by this time, by the way, had included reauthorization of the voucher program, right? So a really critical bill. Didn't cost taxpayers anything. Republicans, felt very comfortable about that. And we had this Elon Musk problem. And so then January 1st of this year, we started all over again. We got reintroduced. We now have 280 co-sponsors, and we are hoping to get it passed through the House again, and then the Senate, and maybe third time's a charm. We'll see. So why is it that we've been able to be so successful? And what is it about our efforts or the pediatric cancer efforts that has enabled us to really succeed in Washington, D.C.? Our secret sauce is our kids. So when I started in 2009, my son Ben was, by the time I got going, he was 8 years old. And Ben's an incredible communicator. And so when I'd be going office to office asking for support, and some members of Congress in their offices were just really difficult and critical. And I'd pull Ben out of school, and which he loved, and we'd go to Capitol Hill, and he'd be like, "Mommy, do you want me to make them cry?" And he could do it. He was amazing. He'd be like, "Boom, yes, Jake, Ben, go for it." And be like, "Okay," and boom, he would just have them in tears. And Ben was just my secret agent. He was incredible. And then, now Ben's 6'2", and he has a deep voice. So I can't use Ben for that anymore. But along the way, we started using all the other kids in our community, kids who are patients, who are survivors, who are siblings, the forgotten siblings and the scared and shaken best friends. And we bring them to Capitol Hill, and we have them meet, with staff and members of Congress, and they are just unforgettable. We had this girl come, and she, 10-year-old little Texan girl, and she went up to, one of the senators, and she just looked at him, and she's like, why is if you were going to develop a drug, or if you were a doctor, how come it is that kids can't get the drugs? How come it's only doctors? And he just looked at her, and here's this kid, she's anorexic and bald, and she needed that drug, and that's how we get things done in Capitol Hill, because the truth is nobody has what we have, which is kids who are just so powerful, and they're so articulate. And these kids who you treat, illness does something to a child. It makes them just so brilliant and powerful and unforgettable. And that's really why we are so successful. We also rely a lot on our parents. And we have just this incredible network. It's like very unorganized. It's not just Kids v. Cancer. We have like partnerships with a bazillion other pediatric cancer groups, and they find parents for us or constituents, or we find parents who are CNN reporters or Fox News reporters. That's really good now. Or they're New York Times op-ed writers, or they're healthcare lobbyists, or they play golf or squash with some member of Congress. And like all of these relationships that you just find along the way are really critical. The one I'm actually most proud of in the last couple months. So my best friend from high school's, Pam, her sister Linda's friend, daughter, okay, unfortunately, so she's a pediatric cancer mom, and her kid is a survivor and doing okay. And she has a table next to President Trump in Mar-a-Lago. And that's been like really successful. She's going to talk to him about the Give Kids a Chance Act. I mean, like, that's how you get it done. That's how you get it done. And like, as you all know, like, don't cross a parent whose kid has cancer or had cancer. Like, we are just unstoppable. And it's not just like, the eggheady, like nerdy, highly educated parents like me. It's every single parent. I mean, this kind of experience, as you know, just takes any parent, and it just gives them the dignity and the power and the passion to just go and change the world. And so that's really how we do it. We've got this piece of us that no other lobbying group in DC has. So we use it to press members of Congress, to press their staff. We also use it to find out if they have personal links to pediatric cancer, and they oftentimes, everybody, not everybody, but so many people do, it turns out, right? And if you just dig hard enough, it's incredible what you can find, and that's how we do it. We don't have the pharmaceutical industry is the industry that provides the second most financial support to members of Congress. So they just really rely on, drug companies to do their jobs and to stay in their jobs. It's not easy to cross the pharmaceutical and biotech industry if you're a member of Congress. There's a lot of good you can do, and why should the good you do be, undermining like one of your major donors? Like, we really have to make a good case. So we try to put together bills that are the best science, and we also bring physicians and scientists to the Hill to confirm that, the work that we're doing is in fact priority of the scientific community. And the work I do, I actually prefer doing, the appropriations are also very important, and there's some amazing advocacy groups doing appropriations. Because I work on FDA bills, they don't end up usually costing taxpayers anything, and that makes it easier to get Republican support. And so that's sort of what we focus on, and that's how we do it. And so that's what I've done so far. So where are we today? Because 2005 has been a really anomalous year and a really hard year, and I don't have to tell all of you this. You know that, thousands of staff at National Cancer Institute and NIH and FDA were cut. It wasn't just young staff, like the future of our, of our science and the future physicians and scientists we have who are going to make Americans safe. It was also actually, what we're seeing at FDA in particular is many medical officers who are like my age who they have a formula for retirement. If you've worked there a certain number of years and you're a certain age, you can qualify for retirement benefits. And they're all retiring, right? Because it's just so discouraging now to work at FDA. And I'm told that 10% of NCI has quit or retired, and that a much higher percentage of FDA has quit and retired. And that's devastating. I'm sure you've all been reading how all the DEI grants at NIH were cut, I think almost $900 million. And if you look at them, by the way, some of the grants, diversity is defined, none of them should be cut, but in some, diversity is defined by age. It's defined by pediatrics. Just crazy. As you know, there's been all sorts of talk in Washington. The White House asked for a 40% cut in NIH. Then, thankfully, the appropriators in Congress have proposed a budget where it's level. But even if it's passed, There could be, the White House, the OMB has announced that they will ask for another rescission package, which means that, their interpretation of the congressional budget is a cap. It's not what they have to spend, so they could still elect to have a 40% cut, and it's created complete havoc at the National Institutes of Health and National Cancer Institute. The pay line has gone down to 4%, meaning only 4% of all grant applicants are funded. And for those of you who haven't put together a grant, like all the grant applicants are really great. You don't just spend months and months on a grant and put together something that's not meritorious. And so it's really, there is a crisis, there really is a crisis now. And as you all know, there's always been a crisis for pediatric cancer research, right, and for pediatric research generally. So welcome to our world, for the rest of the world. It cuts us harder. It cuts us harder because we have less fat to cut, right? And because, with the respect to incentives and requirements for pediatric cancer development, we actually really depend on FDA resources and FDA personnel to be working with sponsors to designing these clinical trials. When they have fewer, staff, it really makes things difficult. So what is there to be done? At Kids v. Cancer, we're going to get the Give Kids a Chance Act passed, and then we have sort of 2 bills we're working on. I can talk about them more if you're interested. I don't know if I'm, we have different kinds of legislative efforts. Some of them appeal to Democrats, some of them appeal to Republicans. Our voucher program appeals to Republicans, and we don't have the Democratic support I wish we had. And our PREA requirements, we appeal to Democrats, and we don't have the Republican support I wish we had. So we have a Republican majority in Congress and in the White House. So we have 2 great Republican projects that we're going to be rolling out. And I'll talk about them sort of in a minute. But then I just want to also touch on, I'll just tell you quickly. So one of them is in 2022, under the Biden administration, a law was passed called the Inflation Reduction Act. It addressed a really terrible problem, which is drug pricing has gotten to be crazy, and many companies have used lawyers to what's called evergreen their drugs, meaning extend their market exclusivity and patent rights for like 20 years or something. So that that wasn't ever the intent, that they would have the opportunity to premium price their drugs for 20 years. And so under the Inflation Reduction Act, Medicare and Medicaid can come in, and every year there would be a certain number of drugs for which they can negotiate lower prices if the drugs are 7 or 11 years past approval. 7 for small molecule and 11 for biologics. And this is great. And the problem with it, though, is it doesn't include, the 7 and 11 years doesn't account for if a company earned pediatric exclusivity on their extra pediatric studies. So suddenly, one of the major incentives has just gone away. And so we have to go back to Congress and say we need a carve out for that. The other piece that I want to work on is that our consortiums in pediatric cancer, and by the way, in all pediatric diseases, not just pediatric cancer, when they work with sponsors on novel therapies or newly approved therapies, almost all the time, the companies are coming to the consortiums because they have either requirements or very generous incentives to study their drugs in pediatrics. And what we've seen, for a lot of reasons, unfortunately, the consortiums are so used to having terrible relationships, strained relationships with industry, where access to the drugs are so difficult, that consortium leaders, the PIs will just be so grateful, and they'll say, okay, great, thank you for the drug. We'll take care of the entire study. Don't worry, we will pay for everything. And then they'll give the data to the companies. That's the deal. And then they get the drug. They get to study it in the kids get access to it. It's a lot of good happens. But the companies take this data, and they either get a freebie, so they get to submit it to the FDA to satisfy their requirements without paying for it, or there's like another program called Pediatric Exclusivity, where they may potentially earn hundreds of millions of dollars by submitting this data, and they may get 6 months of extra exclusivity. Meanwhile, Children's Oncology Group or any of the other consortiums are paying for the studies, and not only are they paying for the studies, but Dornberg, OHSU is paying for the studies, because as you know, like when you accrue kids onto academic studies where there is no industry sponsor, you're subsidizing this. And so one thing I really want to work on is just ensuring that when companies have requirements or incentives, they can cough up, for them, 10, 20 million bucks, it's just peanuts for them. And so there's no reason that our consortiums and our pediatric cancer center or pediatric centers need to be subsidizing companies for their requirements and their incentives. So just as to give you like one number to get really outraged on the whole thing, there was a drug approved a few years ago called ruxolitinib. Ruxolitinib? Yeah, so thank you, which I guess is a good drug. And, and the company is Incyte. And so Children's Oncology Group did this study. Maybe you had some kids on it. I bet it cost COG, $5-10 million to do all these studies. They ended up doing like 4 studies with Incyte. And it's great, maybe it was exciting. Incyte made over $800 million on the data. Now that's an extreme, but that's what we need to fix as a community, not only for cancer, but for all pediatric studies. This just can't be how we do things going forward. And I do think that we'll have an opportunity to change that. So the other piece is for you who are researchers or who care about research in pediatrics, what can you do in this environment? First of all, please help me and help all of us change these, the environment regarding compensation for pediatric clinical studies and for all the other legislation we're working on. If you want to get involved, we want you. If you have families who would like to get involved, send them to Lorna, send them to me. There are a million ways we can get families involved. Some families, of course, have the capacity to raise millions of dollars, and that's so important. But some families don't, and we can still use them, in really critical ways. And then the other thing I want to talk to you about, of course, is the $2 million night grant, which is so exciting and it's coming to this hospital. And I hope you are all really coming together to figure out how you can make sure that kids get a piece of this. I Googled around and I saw that in the $2 billion. Did I say $2 billion? I meant that. So in the last $1 billion grant, I saw that kids didn't get, there was no allocations for pediatrics, for the pediatric division. And I saw there little, all these folks, they use advertisements of bald kids and stuff, and it's just not okay. And so I hope as a community, you figure out what you need, and you just really figure out right now, this is a window of opportunity. It's going to shut soon. It's maybe a few months. I mean, Lauren is going to be really a critical person in figuring out what pediatrics at OHSU can get. But this is the most important financial challenge that you all as a department have. And I really hope you all of you in nonprofits, who are physicians, who are medical practitioners in other way, come together and really figure out what you can all do to express outrage, to express awareness, to just, to just raise your voices and say that, what really matters in the future is, everything matters, but if there's one set of patients we need to treat for cancer, it's kids, right? If I get cancer now, I don't want to get cancer, but I've had this incredible, long, full life. It's okay. What's not okay is that Jacob had cancer. It's not okay that Sam had cancer, and I know that's why you're all here. I'm speaking to the crowd, but don't be quiet, don't be this is the moment. You have to step out of what you're doing every day and come together and really figure out what you're going to do to convey how important it is and how morally appropriate it is to claim a big piece of this $2 billion for pediatrics. So that's it. Thank you.
Hey, Nancy, that was great. We have some time for some questions.
Thank you so much. My name is Laura Mutri. I'm a hospitalist here, and I love attorneys. You mentioned that in the beginning. But I cannot do my job without attorneys by my side. I work in the medical legal partnership space. It was really wonderful to hear everything that you had to say. I had two questions. One, you mentioned something about the legal understanding of medical issues and talking about organs and solid tumors versus mutations. If we could work together as advocates in medicine and law and maybe change the language or change those definitions, would there be a trickle down, more access to cancer drugs for kids, or really any drug? Is that a bigger problem?
So that's a really good question. So are legal definitions the same thing as scientific definitions? Nope. They're like, sometimes they're not even at all related. And maybe that's okay. I mean, like lawyers are not scientists. So, and they have like different roles. Like in science, you want something as precise as possible, even if it's very, very narrow, and you can be nuanced because of course you want to treat a patient appropriately, right? And in law, we're just looking for like a big, just simple rule that everybody can follow, and it's not nuanced. So they have different goals. For cancer research now, if the target as defined legally, and now by the way, the way the FDA is interpreting this molecular target is like any actionable mutation. It doesn't have to be genomic, right? It can be like a protein, it can be like whatever. They'll count that as an actionable, as a molecular target. So, and if you have any molecular target, as long as it's on the FDA label, you can claim that there's a required pediatric study in cancer. So there really is this opportunity. And if you have like targets you're interested in, well, first of all, you can call me and I'll spend more time on it. But like you can, and if you find a company developing a drug that hits that target, you can go and you can say, listen, I'll write your required pediatric studies, pay me, and I'll do the studies, you know. And I hope that you all think about that. And we're going to get better studies that way too, by the way. Companies don't want to write their own pediatric study plans. They don't have the expertise. It's not part of their mission. Their mission is adult drug development because that's where the rate of returns are financially. And so there's really an opportunity there. The part you didn't ask, but I think you were thinking about was, well, what about non-cancer drugs when the molecular target is relevant to another pediatric disease? And it's kind of heartbreaking because when I first wrote the bill for like the first 36 drafts, we had cancer and non-cancer drugs. And the pushback from industry was just so intense. And so I went to the FDA, and Janet Woodcock, who at that time ran the Center for Drugs and Evaluation Research, she said, okay, let's just narrow it to cancer, and then we can always go back and do non-cancer. And now we really should do non-cancer, right? Because there are a lot of drugs that hit targets outside of the cancer space for which children who have terrible diseases, you know, could really benefit from drugs developed for other indications. The way DC works, I can't be the one who does it. It has to be one of the big umbrella organizations like American Association for Pediatrics. Really, they're the ones that need to do it, and they have not decided they want to do it yet, and that's really the big problem. And part of the reason they don't want to do it is because it's really hard, and the chance of failure is like 30–40%, maybe higher. And so it's easier for a little group like mine to do something that's very high risk. And you know, if you have failure rate, like we're only funded by friends and family. You know, our friends love us even if we don't succeed. Whereas like if you're a big institution and you spend years on something and you fail, like you have a lot of people to answer to, and so like that's hard. And so we're going to have to figure that out. And we're also very turfy in Washington, D.C., so it's not like I can move in and say, don't worry, I'll do it. Like that would not go over well with anybody. Yes.
Dr. Brainer.
Thank you. That was an incredibly inspiring talk, and your work is amazing. I am the only family member in my family who is not a lawyer.
What a family.
So I really don't like them. I was just going to mention that this department, and Steve will check my math, this department spends almost $1 million a year subsidizing COG studies. It is our second largest expense as a department. And I think if you can move that forward, we would be endlessly appreciative.
Yeah.
Because we can do such better things with that.
You can, and some of this stuff does need to be subsidized. I mean, COG is doing, when COG studies biologics developed in academia, you know, that, you'll still have to subsidize that. Some of the phase 3 studies COG may do, where you're just looking at like standard of care versus some new other question that, you know, companies are, that's still going to be an academic study that requires subsidization. But I'm guessing that more than half, maybe 2/3 of COG studies, you know, should be funded by industry. And by the way, I think that COG should get a piece of the upside when they, you know, for companies that receive these incredible incentives. So that is going to be something I want to work on. And I really ask you to help do that. It's not easy when we have a whole community to upset people.
I think we have time for one more question. Monica?
I'll just echo, thank you so much for the work you do and for the galvanizing talk. I wanted to hear your thoughts about, on the role of the insurance providers. So let me just tell you why. Like, you know, if something exists on the adult side that's not approved for kids because of historic legacy reasons, and especially in the relapse sort of setting, I've heard from my clinical colleagues, it's virtually impossible to get something repurposed through insurance mechanisms in that setting. So do you think there's a role somehow for insurance providers to also step up?
We did look at that. The question is, what do you do when drugs haven't been studied in kids? And I think you're talking mostly about drugs that are already approved for adult indications, right? So two things. One is we for about 8 years at Kids v. Cancer, we had a compassionate use program where our staff would staff physicians who wanted to seek compassionate use access to FDA-approved cancer drugs for their pediatric patients. Usually the drugs actually were not FDA approved because you can use compassionate use or single IND for unapproved drugs as well. And the FDA now has a program. It's actually quite a good program, and happy also to share that information if any of you want to seek compassionate use access of a therapy. The FDA now has like a 800 number, and they have nurses on staff, and they'll call, you know, they won't get the drug for you, but they'll call the manufacturer, and when manufacturers they don't say you have to do it, but you know, when you get a call from the FDA for like one kid, you know, if it's approved drug, they will almost always give it. Also, my son was treated at NYU, and we had just an unbelievable team of social workers. They were just terrifying. You think lawyers are terrifying. You should have met these social workers. They were just, oof. And they got insurance providers to pay almost all the time. So, I mean, it's not a perfect situation. And, you know, like one time, you know, but it's usually more a problem when like you have a drug in phase 3 and it's about to get approved, and there's like, or maybe there's an expansion trial for adults, but not for kids. Like, it's really hard then. That's really when it's heartbreaking. Yeah. I just want to say for all of you, thank you so much for coming. Like, my goal in life is just to get, you know, to support physicians in getting better treatments for kids. And so if there's anything I can ever do with you in your own individual work, or point you to other resources, like that's part of why I'm here in the universe too. So Lorna can always get you in contact with me, or Stephen. My organization is called Kids v. Cancer. It's like original, right? And so, you know, really, like, please call all of me. And, you know, like, I just also want to say, like, thank you. Like, life can be, there's still so much hope. There's so much we can do. My kids are doing great. Ben is now a teacher in New Orleans teaching social studies to 3rd and 4th graders, and he's doing incredible stuff. And Sarah, we had a baby, and she's now 14 years old, and she's hit high school, and it's terrifying for me as a mother. You know, like, there's still like so many moments of joy, and I just, all of you working in pediatrics, it can be really traumatizing. And I just want to say, like, just focus on the joy, and thank you so much for what you're doing, and stay in the game. So thank you all.